For me, this story begins about 15 years ago when I was a hospice doctor, a palliative medicine physician in Chicago, at the University of Chicago. And I was taking care of terminally ill patients and meeting their families. And in my lab at the time, I was studying something known as the widower effect, which is the tendency or the increased tendency of the recently bereaved to die. So when I die, my wife's risk of death goes up. Actually, this is a topic, the study of which was first inaugurated in England in 1858 by William Farr, who was the recorder of deeds and so forth here in this country. And so it's a canonical finding in the social sciences, this idea that if one person dies, their spouse's risk of death might go up. And I was spending a lot of time in my lab studying this topic, and in my clinical part of me was taking my little black bag and going to the south side of Chicago and going into people's homes and caring for them as they were dying. And I was watching how the death and the illness of the person who was dying also was affecting their loved ones. And one day, I was caring for a woman who was dying of dementia, and she, unlike this person, unlike this patient, she was being cared for by her daughter. And her daughter was exhausted from caring for her mother who was dying. And the husband, the daughter's husband, had himself become sick as a result of his wife's exhaustion. And one day I was driving home and my phone rings, and it's a call from the husband's friend, best friend, who's really worried about his friend, the husband of the daughter, who is the daughter of the patient. So here's this random guy calling me, worried about something that's happening at some degrees removed from him, some degrees of separation. And so I suddenly realized two very obvious things. First of all, this widower effect that I had been studying and been so interested in wasn't restricted to husband-wife partners. It could, of course, generalize to other sorts of pairs of individuals, like parent-child or friend pairs and so forth. And second, I realized something else, which is that it wasn't restricted to pairs. It could actually spread from person to person to person to person, and you could have a kind of non-biological spread of illness and disease. And so I came to see the world in a whole new way. Here, for example, is our mother-daughter pair, and here is the foursome that I just described, along with all these other pairs near them. And all of these people and more are connected to each other via ties of marriage and friendship and work and family. And in fact, I came to see pairs of people as a special case of a much broader phenomenon, the study of social networks more generally, and how human connections and human influence can come to affect our lives in all kinds of ways that are both apparent and inapparent on initial inspection. And in fact, these connections are truly vast. And I became obsessed with this. I mean, this became something that I just had to understand. And so, part of the reason I became so obsessed is that when you look at pictures like this, you can't help but observe that social networks are intricate things of beauty. And they are so elaborate and so complex and so ubiquitous, in fact, that one has to ask, why do we form them? I mean, why do we live our lives in social networks? What purpose do they serve? I mean, what causes them? And how do they affect us? So the first topic that we tackled was not death, actually, like the widower effect, but rather obesity. And I did this with my collaborator, my long-term collaborator, James Fowler. And it had become trendy, this was in the 1990s, it had become trendy to speak of the obesity epidemic. And it's clear that obesity in the United States and in the UK are epidemic in one meaning of the word, which is that there's more of it than there used to be. There's a higher than baseline prevalence of obesity. But we wondered whether we could understand obesity as epidemic in another sense, namely as contagious, as spreading from person to person. Could we understand obesity as being contagious not just metaphorically, but literally? Would we be able to show, in fact, that obesity could spread, like the 4 people I mentioned earlier, but on a huge scale throughout society? So this is one of the first pictures that we drew to begin to study this. This is a social network. Every dot is a person. Every line between them is a relationship between 2 people. And here we make the dot size proportional to people's body mass index. So bigger dots are bigger people. And if you're properly obese, if your BMI is above 30, we also color you yellow. And there are 2,200 people here. And if you look at this network, you can immediately see that there are clusters of obese and non-obese individuals within the network, in little regions of the network. But the complexity, the visual complexity, is still very, very high. And it's not obvious that these clusters are there, although it is to me now after looking at these images for a long time. And in any case, several questions are raised by this clustering. First of all, how much clustering is there? Second, is there more clustering than is just simply due to chance? Maybe if we mapped a social network, who's connected to whom, we'll find people clustered with each other of similar body size just by dumb luck. Third, how big are the clusters? And fourth, and most interestingly, what causes the clusters? I mean, why do these clusters arise? Now, to document that the clusters were more than would be expected due to chance, we did some fancy mathematical techniques, the result of which is this graphic here. On the y-axis is the increase in the probability that a person is obese, given that a social contact of theirs is obese. And on the x-axis is the degrees of separation. So on the far left, that purple line says that if your friend is obese, your risk of being obese is 45% higher. And if your friend's friend is obese, your risk of being obese in the orange is 25% higher. And if your friend's friend's friend is obese in the lighter orange, your risk of being obese is 10% higher. And it's only when we get to your friends, 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 friends that there's no longer a relationship between your body size and the body size of those around you. And in fact, this phenomenon, as I'll argue today, is generic, applies not just to obesity, it applies to all kinds of phenomena within our society. So what this slide shows is that there's more obesity, more clustering than would be expected due to chance alone, and that the radius of these clusters is to about 3 degrees of separation. Well, what might cause such clustering? There are at least 3 possible explanations. The first one is induction, a kind of social domino effect. So here the argument is that I gain weight, and when I gain weight, it causes Helen to gain weight, and when Helen gains weight, it causes Matthew to gain weight, and it just spreads through the network. One person's weight gain influencing another person to gain weight. Another possibility, which we appreciated and described right from the very beginning in all of our papers, is the idea that, well, maybe people of similar body size preferentially form ties with each other. So maybe it's not that my weight gain is causing Helen's weight gain. Maybe Helen and I chose to form a friendship because we had a similar habits or a similar body size. And a third possibility is that not that my weight gain causes Helen's weight gain, nor that I form a tie with her because of we have a similar body size, but rather that we both share an exposure to something like a gym that's making us both lose weight at the same time, or like a fast food restaurant. So there's a fast food restaurant, we're both exposed to it, we gain weight at the same time. It's not that my weight gain caused her weight gain or that we formed a tie. It's some other factor that confounds our ability to tell the difference. And so again, homophily is this idea of birds of a feather flocking together, or like of love of like. Induction is the interpersonal effect, and confounding is some other factor that causes both things to happen at the same time. And we used a variety of strategies to sort this out, to tease these apart, because all 3 are almost always all present, but you need to be able to distinguish one from the other using a variety of statistical techniques. Now, the longitudinality of our data, the fact that in the network that I just showed you a moment ago of 2,000 people was a network we were able to follow for over 30 years, helped us hugely in this regard. And I'm about to show you a little 30-second video animation that took me and James about 5 years of our lives to do and cost nearly $1 million. But it's not just this video that cost $1 million. A lot of other things went into this as well. So here, every dot is a person, again. Every line between them is a relationship. Here I only show 2 kinds of relationships, non-genetic ties. The gray lines are spousal connections, and the purple lines are friendship connections. So 2 people who share a similar body size, it's not because they share genes in common. They're not siblings or parent-child or something like that. The dot size is proportional to people's body size. Bigger dots are bigger people, and the yellow dots are dots that are big enough that their body mass index is above 30. And in addition, the red perimeter dots are women, and the blue perimeter dots are men. And when we made this video animation, it all started because we had in our minds this kind of metaphor borrowed from physics, where, you know, if you drop a pebble in a pond, you get this ripple that spreads out from the pond. And in fact, if you do this in a laboratory situation, the ripple can hit the perimeter of the water table and then bounce back, and you can get these standing waves on the surface. You know, or if you're a kid, you were a kid, you were all kids at one point, I hope, or you have kids, you know that if you move your body in the bathtub just right and you slosh around, if you move your body synchronously with the water, you can get the water to come out of the bathtub by creating a standing wave inside the bathtub. So what we wanted to see was whether we could find patient 0 of the obesity epidemic. That first person to gain weight, and then you'd get this wave of obesity that would spread out from that person. So I gain weight, it makes my friends gain weight, and my friends' friends gain weight. Could we actually see this? And in order to see this, we also needed to take into account that the social interactions were changing across time. So it was very difficult to assemble these data and analyze them as I'm about to show you. But in a minute now, we're going to take daily cuts through this network for 32 years, from 1971 to the present. You're going to see the network evolve across time. People are going to form ties and break ties. They're going to marry and divorce each other, befriend and defriend each other. You're going to see a sea of yellow as the people generally gain weight.